Hi, everyone. I'm Mercedes from the Light Leaks, a community for women and non-binary filmmakers. Today, we're speaking to Sasha Leigh Henry, whose debut feature film, Dinner with Friends, had its world premiere at TIFF 2025. We're so excited to have her here with us. Dinner with Friends is about a group of eight friends in their 30s who are navigating the realities of their individual lives and trying their best to maintain the closeness they've had since their 20s. Thank you for your time today, Sasha. We're so excited.
Thank you for having me.
So, this is your feature film debut, not only as a writer, but also as a director. So, congratulations. What made
Thank
Dinner
you.
with Friends the script you wanted to put on screen?
Well, I mean, I guess it was kind of born out of necessity and in a response to thing. I mean, the reality of it is the industry's in a really weird topsy-turvy time. And, the idea came to me and my writing partner and creative partner, Tanya Thompson, and I started writing it in the pandemic. And, I think just we love talking movies, right? And it was
Yeah.
really I'm an independent filmmaker through and through. And so while I was fortunate enough to get to make a series in Canada with a really big network, ultimately I'm constantly in my mind, like, what do I have? What can I make with whatever I have right now? And so this idea came to me as like, Tanya and I both love movies like The Big Chill, Husbands and Wives,
Oh, yeah.
those kind of talky movies. And so we started writing this, and then Past Lives came out, and that was really just affirming and encouraging. And I think the movies are quite similar, but after being in a decade of going from, we were the divide in society was reflected in films where it was either
Hmm.
these huge budget, superhero movies and big, franchise vehicles, or much smaller auteur horror kind of
Right.
genre pieces kind of thing. And so, Past Lives being so affecting and feeling so indie in its like spirit and things like that, and especially in contrast to those movies and how much people loved it, was really affirming to be like, okay, there is still an audience for these kinds of movies and people like these kinds of movies as much as we do. So I think, you know, I guess to more specifically answer your question after taking the very long route there, Mercedes, what brought me to it was, yeah, we had won the CSA for Best Comedy Series for Bria Matt Gets a Life in 2024. Yeah, 2024. I was super proud of that, but came up for air in an industry that was just like, survive to 25. And it was
Right.
like the Crypt Creeper was walking around in this bitch. Every general
Hmm.
meeting, everything, it just felt like people were just like, well, we have $10, and and it just felt like from programming decisions, even internationally, like, I don't just pigeonhole this on Canada, that it felt like people were throwing spaghetti at the wall, and it like just
Hmm.
seeing what stuck. And it was like, well, shit, I got some spaghetti. I might not have the most, but it's not nothing. And so, myself and my producing partner Tanya, we kind of looked at, we had about $100,000 that we were able to raise from council grants and our own personal investment. And like, we had gone in for some other additional funding, but we kind of, after we wrote the script, kept it in the drawer as the fuck it project. And so when
Yeah.
we kind of put for air post Bria and saw how topsy turvy things were in the landscape, and just kind of, feeling that yearning for ourselves as artists to create, we were like, fuck it, let's make this.
Yeah, I love that attitude. So I was at your dialogue talk at TIFF, the Shortcuts to First Features panel, and I loved hearing each director's journey. Each of you had these non-traditional routes to directing that were very inspiring for me to listen to. Can you share with our community more about what led you to the film industry?
Yeah, I mean, I started off in performing in started off performing. I went to a theater arts high school, and then I went on to pursue that in university. But I got into the University of Waterloo, and I mean, you don't need a degree from a heavily computer science, engineering, and math university in performing to really become an actor. So I was like, if I'm gonna put my 10th out, like, if I'm gonna get a degree, let me get it in something useful.
Right.
Um, and by useful, I mean useful in as far as capitalism is concerned, not useful in
Hmm.
terms of life. I think a degree in the arts is still definitely worthwhile, whether
Definitely.
money or not. But it was like, let me be here, let me get something practical then that could maybe leverage these skills. And so this program called speech communication, which is not necessarily speech pathology, and not it was more about like literally speech communication, how we talk to each other across cultures through public communication and presentations and that stuff. And I found that I kind of loved writing there. And then while I was in university, because it was such a math and engineering heavy school, a lot of people, to kind of keep the fire alive for myself, I would volunteer at the festival. And then I went on to work
Oh
as
yeah.
contract staff, because it kind of worked out
Oh
that
cool.
Waterloo has like a frosh week that is like a week delayed from most schools. So it ended up that we were always on frosh week during the bulk of TIFF. So
Oh
instead of frosh
perfect.
week, I would be down at the Scotiabank Theater working the rush lines. And so, I graduated university, and I was just like, yes, I love performing and I want to be a performer, but I don't think I can subject my self-esteem to trying to put my 10,000 hours into auditioning to be the,
Hmm.
sassy black friend for every role. And in Canada, we
Hmm.
barely even had that on TV, let alone. And so I just didn't like the idea that, you know, for so many reasons other than my talent or capabilities, people might limit what I could do in that way.
Hmm.
And that just felt like a rough path to set myself down on, when you need so much confidence, I think, to pursue these different careers in the arts, including performing. And so, I started writing, directing. I found a program called POV Film, and that's where I got my first little taste of, learned what a DP was, and like, the roles that directors really play and that kind of stuff. And that began it all.
Amazing. And as a Canadian filmmaker, what was it like to have the world premiere of your first feature at TIFF and be amongst the audience? Were there any special moments?
You know, I hate to brag, but I am going to.
Always
This I've been
brag.
very fortunate that this is my, fifth debut at TIFF. I've had produced two projects and had three projects of my own. So
It's
it was
amazing.
like a very, very unique feeling in that I could almost feel a bit experienced at it. Like,
Yeah.
there's been years when my first and second years, I would burn myself out so much and I'd RSVP to everything and I'd do all of that stuff. And this year I
Hmm.
felt like I just had a better sense. I mean, it was still full on, but to better sense how to manage my time. And then the premiere, like, it never gets old, right? You're just
Yeah.
never going to have a warmer audience, a more loving audience, right? Like, it's rare that probably at least one of your screenings, when you are from Canada, particularly Ontario, especially if you're anywhere from the GTA and you work and live there, right? That
Hmm.
the room's not going to be filled with, like, even if they're not direct friends and family, like, oh, that person you worked with on the project, or someone you met a long time ago at this thing who does stuff with festivals and all that kind of stuff. So it's always such a special treat, and like, I always feel such immense pride. It feels like getting to kind of, you're gonna get to represent the country at the Olympics or something, right? Like, I
Yeah.
really feel, and especially we made this film. We went to camera with $100,000 and shot it in 9 days, and so
It's
for it to
amazing.
end up debuting at TIFF is such a huge win, and it meant a lot to me, not just for myself, but for the cast and crew too. I think a lot of time you work on passion projects, and at best, right, you're proud of the thing you made, and you all like each other still, right? And that's
Hmm.
enough. You're not making a lot of money. Rarely do they pay off professionally as well. And so it meant a lot to me for, the cast to be able to say, like, yeah, and it got into TIFF. They took a chance. I mean, everyone got paid, but certainly, like, they couldn't be wooed with better rates somewhere else, kind of thing. It's a very low budget, but they all showed up and did a fantastic job. And so it was a great, like, slam dunk for me. I really felt proud.
How did your experience as the creator, writer, and director of the Crave series Bria Mac Gets a Life inform this feature?
It was fucking bullshit. No, I'm joking. It informed it just because all the experience adds up. I think
Yeah.
what I think being the showrunner of Bria Mac, right, and stepping into that role helped me crystallize the leadership role, and in that way that you carry when you are a director on your own independent feature set. And I think that the overarching sense, where, I mean, in the same way that a director does, right, it transfers a bit who's at the head of that hierarchy depending on
Hmm.
the medium. But similarly in a showrunner, you're overseeing all the departments thing, and it was a lot of what I was mindful of making Bria too, and trying, is that people are here to try to show up for me. They want to help bring this vision to life. They've heard about this in development, and by description, the show is so exciting. And how can I make sure that I'm giving them the right resources and supporting them, and being just not just a leader that was asking of them and like, yes, this is your job, but genuinely supporting them. I think a lot of times in film, even when you have a healthy budget, sometimes we get under the impression that, like, you forget the reality of like, yes, while this may be your role and I've asked you to come on to be the production designer or the costume designer or what have you, but have I given you the resources to carry out the role as I'm
Hmm.
asking you to, kind of thing, right? It's like, yes, I asked you to be the makeup artist, but now if I'm going to ask for 10 people to be in prosthetics, right, for a shoot in a week and a half, but I only gave you $100 to do it, I think as a leader, understanding that like part of my job is going to have to be how can I help meet you halfway so that we can get a version of this in time and not come down hard on somebody who I never gave the resources to be able to deliver what I'm asking for to begin with, kind of thing. And I think, understanding the morale of set, and not that every day has to be a hunky-dory day and everyone has it's a party all the time, but I think Steve Jobs once said, or I watched in a Steve Jobs biopic or some video on the internet said that Steve Jobs once said this,
Hmm.
but um that like it's okay if you don't have a good, like, if you're not excited for the day, you're not looking for the day, one day, if the answer is like, I'm ready for today or I'm looking for today, one day you can say no. But once that no starts being too many days in a row kind of thing, then that's something to look at. And so this was my thing. Is like, you don't need to be happy here every day, but I want you to want to be here at least 3 out of the 5 days of our week. And I think having that mindfulness and that stuff definitely helped when you're looking at a project that you're shooting for essentially $100,000 in 9 days, right? And so
Hmm.
I think that translated to like, I was a real stickler, our associate producer, and my producing partner Tanya will tell you, I was a real stickler about the craft table. And not because like, oh, what is it for craft? But even if it is just apples, right? Like, there
Yeah.
is a difference between you just having the bag of apples and once a few people have taken them, it's like this ripped bag that's just like sitting there, versus like somebody has tended to this table and arranged these. It like communicates something subconsciously. It just goes a little bit further, right? We've all worked on that project where it's like, yeah, and we auditioned in this dungeon, this dark basement of something, and it was pizza every day, and it was this and it was that, and it was like, okay, we don't have a lot of money, but we do. New Metric is a great partner of ours, and they had some space that they hadn't moved into yet in their office, and it's a beautiful big window space on Queen Street West, accessible by transit. Okay, great, right? Now you can go somewhere. We can go somewhere nicer for auditions, and we can rehearse here. We have somewhere nice and bright and open and easily accessible, because once we're on shoot, it's going to be a very small, tiny house, and so and you just start to understand. It sounds dumb when I say this because I'm sure there's a better term, but it's really the user experience, right, for the
Yeah.
cast and how you're managing that, especially on a film like this, where again, everyone's getting paid and legal minimums and more than, yes, but these are not the rates we come to do this job for, right? And so
Hmm.
even if we could only afford pizza every day, what if instead of pizza, what if one day it's like handmade really good sandwiches, or we do like a deli spread or something that might just cost as much and is essentially still a sandwich, but not the same thing every single meal, right? Or,
Right.
can we, you get what I'm saying? Just
Of
a general
course.
mindfulness that I think I learned. And I learned how to compromise but keep my creative um, vision well there. And I don't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing that I learned, but I think I kind of learned maybe finally how to compartmentalize a bit. I learned
Mm.
job, it just doesn't, I've always felt this way, but it was cemented in that role that like it doesn't benefit me to take things overly personally,
Hmm.
unless they're absolutely personal, Mercedes, in which case then we should probably have a talk. No.
Definitely.
But yeah, and hard conversations. I think not being
Hmm.
afraid to have hard conversations, the longer you take to have them sometimes, the more you pay for it one way or another. And so
The overall theme I heard in your response was just like intentionality, and like that creates success in any project with any collaborators. Really, you answered a lot of this already, but I really I'm curious about what were some insights you gained about the filmmaking process while directing your first feature here, and that you will take on for different projects in the future.
I'm trying to be succinct, but I don't know how. I
Don't even try. We're here. I will listen to everything.
feel like, yeah, like, I mean, I felt this strongly even before, and it was cemented because, again, it's even, and a lot of the people that I worked with on this project, it was my first time working with them in one way or another, simply between
Mhm.
availability and what I was looking for. But I think, like, you know, people say like films are made in prep. I think that's true. And I think that prep actually starts from hiring. It doesn't start when prep actually starts. I think like good hires are worth their weight in gold. And like what constitutes a good hire might shift slightly for some people. But I think for me, like you are showing up, we're like with the skills and know-how, you can demonstrate you have a skill, know-how, and enthusiasm for what we're about to do. And, you know, listen, we all have egos, so it's not going to be ego-less, but can you have respect for the people that you're working around and working beside kind of thing? And I found, because I always say this, people, I laugh when I say it, I don't like work. I'm not trying to make my job harder. I'm not trying to take on more work from anybody kind of thing. I want the production designer to be aces, so I don't have to think about it. This is great. I can leave it. You're just going to show me the thing. I'm like, check. Can we change it? Oh, fantastic, right? Like, don't worry about, and I say that when you hire great people, that's what I want, because I still have to also direct, right? But direct, also worrying about if the production design is going to look the way and all that kind of stuff makes the job even more stressful. And so I think being intentional, again, just with the hires and hiring process and having the confidence to be thorough, because I think at the budget level we were shooting at, it would have probably been easy to try and just like take whoever we could get, right? And see whoever would be willing to whatever. And well, because I can't, but like truthfully, if it seemed like you might be too green or really a not right fit, even if you're willing to do it for the money we had, and there was someone else who we could never afford, I wouldn't hire you just because of that. There were, I don't think, I can confidently say overwhelmingly, there was no one on the set that I didn't think could actually do their job. If I had any concerns about, they wouldn't have been there. And that just let me be able to focus on the things we needed to troubleshoot on and the day at hand a lot more often. Our AD was great and had great experience. Our DP was great, Grant Cooper, and he had a great team that was also great, had great experience. Ibrahim Issa, Zach Rist, you know, Mo Marino, like all people who really like, I say this about the film, but I mean it. And I know because it's a first feature, people, but like, we're underdogs, not amateurs here in Canada. Like, when none of us were new to this, we're true to this. And I think the film really reflects being able, and by that I mean, like, even for Grant, and even though it was $100,000 film, I did a 2-part interview, right? Like, sometimes, because up until then, except for Bria Mack, most of my shorts, I've been fortunate enough to know some very world-class cinematographers in my network, right? But it's really like, which one of the best ones are available this weekend to shoot this thing, right? I've never like that intentionally gone through a process just like director to DP. We were thorough when we were looking for Bria Mack for sure, but there's other input that, you know, comes in, and this was just like, are we enough? Do I think that we could actually vibe, and will you be able to actually help me elevate what we're thinking for these 9 days, and like, you know, take what I'm throwing at you and like riff it even higher. And so, yeah, we had a first interview where like, after you read the script, we talked about it. Here's what I'm thinking, here's what you're thinking. And then we have a second one that was just about creative. Because again, I don't want to have to go through this process feeling shaky about what you're going to do. I like my problems to take me by surprise. And similarly for the performers, like we did a lot of chemistry reads and stuff like that. And it's because I just knew we could shit the bed with camera work. I could shit the bed with direction. I could say the thing, but good performances for this kind of story, right, could make you overlook all of that, right? If they held it down correctly. So being thorough and intentional in that way, I think I definitely saw the benefit of, because yeah, I mean, Grant just had such a great rhythm with his team, and all of the department heads were so good, I think, at managing their teams as much as they could and then bringing forth any fires as they needed them. Tanya was awesome in like, you know, really letting me direct and not bringing me any fires that I think were thing. And so more than anything, I think team continues to be the thing. And that also being realistic with yourself. I always say be delusional, but not in denial. You know, we had 120 something page script, but when we went to camera, like the reality of it is shooting at the time we were waiting for some funding that would have made our overall budget closer to 350. And the reality of it is, as I had promised to people, the project would be ambitious but achievable, challenging but not miserable. And the truth, Mercedes, is if you try to shoot a film that would cost you 300, that's written to a $350,000 budget for $100,000, that is miserable, because it's already quite difficult to try and just shoot $100,000 movie for $100,000 kind of thing. And so it was knowing that, like, before we got too far into prep, right, we sat down and we chopped 35 pages or so, 30 pages, and brought it down to a 95-page script, right? Because you don't want to be there on the day making those decisions as to whether or not you really need this scene, because now you're just killing time you could have given to other scenes to make them even better kind of thing. So, yeah.
Can you share more about that pre-production process? I know like this shoot was 9 days. So how much of you've discussed like the prep, the hiring and all of these things, but really just like more info, like how do you prepare for a 9 day shoot?
Well, yeah, I mean, you get your board down and you break it down. I think we had like certain departments were like 2 weeks so or out from prep. I think one of the things for me as a head creative, was I needed to know what I wanted, and I needed to be flexible, right? But again, we wrote the movie or designed it to be kind of scalable, something that we could shoot if we had a ton of money, not a lot of money. So it came down with prioritizing locations, of course, because that was going to determine just how much set dressing we would be looking for, how much all of that kind of stuff. So that was a key priority. And then once we had those, even though it was a tight shoot, but kind of, I would say our prep was about a month for like people like myself, Tanya, and Grant, I would say. And then for some of the other hires, it was less than that, but people knew what the project was, well, like by then. So even if you weren't officially in prep, again, because you're dealing with pros, most people are going to maybe spend a day or two that week and just make sure they review the thing. Is there anything they want to flag to me? That kind of stuff. So that by the time they start their prep, because we could only afford so many days. And so that meant that days were already committed to buying, to shopping, and we had 2 days of rehearsal, right? And so I just had to know what I wanted, and I had to know how to be flexible. I'm very good at giving the if this, then that feedback kind of thing, which I think is helpful to people. I'm just like, I kind of want this vibe. If you can't get this, then I would take this. And if it can't be this, then ultimately I would be fine if it's nothing, but that's not my preference. This is what my and arming them with all of the range of those options, believing, of course, that Nicole Simmons, our production designer, is of course wanting to do the best thing for me and get the best job and what have you, right? But she's asking me about one singular picture on a wall, knowing the whole picture of what her budget is and that she has to spend whatever. So I'm not going to, in that one time, be like, no, it has to be that for this one. I'm going to trust that she's only asking me if there's another option we can consider for this picture on this wall or for this other thing, right? After doing a proper assessment of her budget and where it feels like she should be or whatever, or she's coming to me for me to identify to her, actually, I know this seems like nothing, but I plan on doing this kind of shot with it. So this is actually more important than X, Y, and Z that was on your list or what have you. So I think just giving as much information as to what I'm thinking, what I'm after. And I think I had it was a very brief one, but it was a strong mood board. And I think I also think it was, again, we did to be scalable. It's very relatively contemporary film. They live in houses that are available now. They wear, like, that kind of thing. So it wasn't necessarily like it was a period piece, and that was intentional.
We've talked a lot about the budget, but really, can you walk us through the realities of navigating financing your first feature?
Not really, no, because we didn't really it's like, I mean, the budget was only $100,000. The reality of it is I applied for funding as well too. So it's like, I'm not gonna tell you that you apply for this fund and this fund and that fund and then you get it. That's not what happened, right? We got a council grant. One council grant from OAC for about 40 grand, and then the other amount was from Canada Council for the Arts, and then we had put in about like 15, 20. And then we did get some things that were helpful to the budget towards the end that boosted it a bit past 100, which were great assets. We're able to get some in-kind because I was a part of a program with the BSO. And so I was able to kind of like let my honorarium from that roll into something else. And then at the same time, or basically, part of that program, essentially what it is that you have to go and do like a field work or what have you. And so I made the case that like, could my first feature be my field work or what have you, and work with my mentor in that capacity. And so they had said yes. So that was able to give us some breathing room, and just help, because part of the program is it helps cover accommodation and things like that for when you are working on doing field work on a set. And so I was like, it'd be great if it's it's a accommodation for us to be on set for these 9 days, and we could have holding and things like that, right? So we're able to get creative with how that, like, my participation in the program like typically would work. But I think that's only because they only permitted that because it was the rare opportunity where my feature was going to be shot at the same time normally when people would do shadows and things like that,
Mm.
kind of thing. And then the Oya Media Career Leap program, and that's a program that has a vetted roster of junior and intermediate like film crew and filmmakers,
Okay.
and they cover their salary. So they cover up to $25 an hour, I think, for a 10-hour day, maybe up to 8 hours or so.
Okay.
And so, of course, we found Felicia, our hair and makeup assistant, through that. Tony, our second AC, like a lot of great people. And of course, covering labor costs helps cover a lot too. So,
Mm-hmm.
that's as all the best I can do and tell you about, like, anyone who can tell you something about financing a feature, truthfully, maybe this is a bit bold of me, is probably lying, because the landscape and the makeup structure of financing changes every single time for almost every film, even the big ones, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're like, oh, and you find out like it's funded by Johnson and Johnson because they weird, like Barbie was partly Mattel,
Right.
you know what I mean? And they
Mm-hmm.
don't, so there's lots of ways. I think for independent filmmakers, right, it's, what can you make for the smallest budget you can get? And at some point, like, we held our feet to the fire and we booked our shooting days even before we knew we got that funding. And we said, we're going to go with $100,000 or not. I mean, I think right now, the funding landscape, it is very tough. It's tough to decipher. Yeah. A lot of it is, there is private equity, but that's the thing about private equity. No one with access to private equity is trying to make their private equity access public. You know what I mean? So it is a lot of like so that's how some of the private equity side of it works. Other parts, I think one of the biggest things right now, from what I've been hearing in meetings and from what I understand, really is cast attachment, because cast is essentially your marketing tool, right? And so someone with some kind of visibility or what have you is the thing that can help start to open some more doors and some higher doors. For example, again, I don't know how you do this, but if Idris Elba said he'd do your short film, now when you go back to certain places that are like, hey, I have a short film with Idris Elba, I'm looking, because everybody wants to attach themselves. If you're going to try and attach yourself to a short, you want it to be the one that Idris Elba's on, or you know what I mean, and that kind of thing. And so in that way, the cast that you're able to attach, the package you can put around it, whether it's a name EP or that kind of thing. But, for me, it's a question of, well, how long do I spend? It's just as long trying to get Idris Elba as it is to just try and find the money and make whatever I could. Like it could easily take just as long, easily. And then you ask myself, okay, if after 6 months I may have attached, or even after a year, I may have attached this really big A-list star, and now it's going to be green and da-da-da-da-da and da-da-da-da-da. Or in a year, I can be done my project and have it to meet the audience that I want to talk to in the world, kind of thing. And depending on where you are in your career, both of those have value. It just depends on where you are. And I think for me with Dinner with Friends, we were just itching to make something. And, Bria took 3.5 years to develop, 6 months to be over, essentially. Right? Like the show premiered in October, and by March, April, we knew it was not getting renewed after spending 3.5 years on it. Which, listen, it's not like I didn't get paid for some development and all the things like that. It's not a bad run by any means. But as an artist, finishing that experience and then sitting there thinking, okay, minimum, am I going to wait another 4 years before I talk to my audience again, before I share a project with my audience? Like, I couldn't stomach all of the ups and downs and the shapes that a project takes again across another 4 years before I would ever have something come out. And so, cast or no. And also the other thing that I did that helped, that might help on your finance journey, is I wrote something to attract good cast. Like, I'm all very aware of what the situation is with our star system here in Canada. And if it's that, like, we don't even have a star system for white people, let alone BIPOC and non-binary and gender diverse folks and queer folks, okay? So one thing that was probably very clear to me is, when was the last time a BIPOC performer got to really be in a meaty, juicy role, or really perform their asses off, or really like put it on something that wasn't, one, so explicitly tethered to their identity, the trauma of their identity, and two, where they're just, most projects, even when they have a BIPOC lead, there's only one lead, right? So you're going to be looking at supporting and that stuff. And so wanted to offer an ensemble where all of the people felt like they really we're going to get a moment in it, right? In hopes that that would attract really good cast, and me as a director saying like, I want to work with really good cast. I will write a thing for you. I will figure it out. I will and give you a moment, hopefully through
Hmm.
my storytelling and work. And that does make a difference, right? How much more
Right.
someone can pay attention to a thing, that kind of stuff. So unfortunately, no hard and fast advice on how to finance your first feature other than to shake every tree, turn over every stone. If you're from Canada, you know about the like government support, tap into it. But take it from me as a person who didn't get it, right? Like for all of the reasons that someone would think that I should get, any of these funds or whatever, are just the same reasons why I might not. It's not, some of these things run by lottery, but jury assessment. And if you look at it like, oh, well, you've done so well, you've done this and you've done this, why wouldn't they give you the money? And it's like, well, you could be on a jury and in the same reason you'd be like, well, she's just done this and she's just done this, maybe we should give the money to someone else. So there's
Hmm.
no guarantees, no matter how successful you become or no matter what you achieve in this industry. There are no guarantees when it comes to financing. And how many famous projects have we heard lost financing like weeks before it was going to happen? Someone backed out or something didn't close and the thing had to shift. You should look up the story of Dallas Buyers Club with Matthew McConaughey. I think something similar happened on that.
Thank you so much. That was so informative. During the ensemble in these dinner party scenes, the audience feels like they're in the room because of the camera's really fluid motion in these contained spaces. How did you collaborate with your DP to capture this film's energy on camera?
Yeah, I mean, we shortlisted pretty extensively. Like we spent a good few days just sitting with the script and going through each scene. And I mean, quickly realizing that it's told over a series of 7 dinners, and so we don't want each of
Mhm.
them to feel the same. And kind of leaning into that to start building a visual language. Immediately, I knew that especially in certain indies, that like being, when the camera is shaky, it usually represents chaos or something is afoot or that kind of
Right.
thing. And I was like, what if we kind of try to flip that a bit and it maybe more mimics the camaraderie between them when things are going well, they're
Hmm.
having a good time. And then, in counter to that, then Grant offered, then yeah, it'd be more still and we'd feel much more still and deliberate and tense movements when, it might be a heavier dinner, whether the audience realizes it or not, right? So, the before, for example, we usually come into other dinners where the camera's moving or bouncing around, but then when Joy is announcing, her the update for her and Malachi, you sit like the camera's very still and it just like slowly pans over to where the table is, right? And it's just like
Hmm.
drawing out attention. So we just kind of sat and we jammed out. I think we were very aligned on, and I think it was Robert Zemeckis' What Lies Beneath, and looking at that. Both Grant and I come from, like, I was doing episodic heavily and he does a lot of commercial work, and in those worlds it's always about like coverage, 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 if you have the time, shoot more rather than less kind of thing. And
Hmm.
we kind of just leaned into the constraint of we only have 9 days. We can't cover everything, even if we wanted to. There's also 8 people, right? And so one of the inspirations for me was husbands and wives. And so we really looked at that, and it has, a very telling scene we sat down and examined is when Mia Farrow says one of her key lines of the scene, and she's in another room and it's just said offhand in the camera. And that's what makes it feel like you're really in there with them, right? And so we thought about that in the psychology of that. When you're at a party or at a house party at your friend's house, I can still hear what's happening in the living room, even though I'm right here, right? But I
Hmm.
don't go and check and make sure I hear every word they said and then come back and hear every word they said and that kind of thing. And so we started thinking of it like that, and the idea of the camera as like the ninth friend. You have those friends
Oh,
sometimes where
yes.
even if we haven't talked in forever and me and my mom are in an argument or something, like we know each other well enough that, like me and my mom are going to have it out and then I'm going to tell you, or me and my partner or me and my other friend might be in a little tiff, but even though they haven't been around enough to weigh in on the situation, you're not like embarrassed to have them around, right? Or to have a tense
Hmm.
conversation in front of them kind of thing. And so it was that person. So someone, the kind of friend that could be around when some of the harder conversations are happening, but it wouldn't feel out of place kind of thing. And or Grant likened it to like the dog in the room kind of thing, just kind of like bopping around to each room, and the way that you would like checking out the scene and kind of that kind of thing. So yeah.
These are really complex characters, and by the end, it really did feel like they were my friends and I really knew them. What do you think are the key factors in writing three-dimensional characters and arcs that really feel true?
Be good writers. No, I'm joking.
Yep.
I mean, my writing partner is really strong at structure. I think, it's definitely kudos to her that I think all of the arcs complete as well as they do in there for sure. And I think, I mean, I don't know. I do think it's something that I am good at. Like, I think it's in the details and the specificities and not, sometimes we go when we think of movies and we think of a certain archetype of a person, but it's like, how do you make them 3D with the specifics, right? Or
Mhm.
what wrench can you throw in it? If you always know the ice queen, cold bitch, right? Well, it's like no
Right.
one has ever, one of the things I'll say this, maybe this is helpful. My writing partner, and I've adopted this, always says, no one is ever as good or as bad as they seem. So if
Mm,
anyone's, but if they feel too flatly painted as the villain and something like, what is that thing? A couple of those things, right? Is it, even if it's like, well, she's a nice queen and a bitch, but she dresses like a slob, and then like turn that around,
mm,
right? That person. Or I think of like two friends that I would technically describe with similar personalities, but what actually makes them different, right? Like what
right.
actually separates them, and try to drill down in that way. And then I think, yeah. I like people watching. I like observing. I like tending. I love dialogue. So I think I feel confident to really kind of just reflect how I really hear people talk and how I talk and that kind of thing. So
Thank you so much. This has been so great to speak with you. I love the movie.
no problem. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Again, I want to say thank you so much to Sasha for speaking with me today. It was such a pleasure to watch her film at TIFF this year. And to everyone listening, I'm Mercedes Gonzales-Bazan, and you can find more conversations like this one by checking out the Light Leaks online and across socials. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.